in terms of that perception of what AI's gonna
Yeah.
do, the medical stuff, amazing, we
Yeah.
all want that. But how do you get over that worry about, "Hang on a minute, people are gonna cheat,
Yeah.
people are," it's
Steph, these are absolutely brilliant examples. And one of the challenges, I think, is that the speed of this revolution is really fast. And so it's really hard to adapt.
Matt, thank you very much for joining us. Do you know, it's funny interviewing you because, like, where do you start? Google feels like it's part of everyone's life now. But I guess the thing I always wonder is, what are your challenges at the moment? Like, what are the things you're kind of worrying about at Google? What are the things that I suppose potentially keeping you awake at night in terms of what's happening in your sector?
Gosh, well, I mean, first, thanks for having me. I think it's been an incredible ride, sort of looking at how technology has changed the world. And at Google's, it's always felt to me like we have an incredible responsibility. This mission is like organize the world's information, make it accessible and useful for everyone. And that's always felt very real to me. When it began, it was about search. And, I started in 2007 and there were less than 20% of people are online. And then we've had the mobile revolution. So we've got smartphones in our pockets. And now today, like 70% of people on the planet are online. And so the moment we're in now is this huge acceleration, as you've talked on this podcast in depth about, with AI coming in. And the promise of sort of putting the world's intelligence in everyone's hands is a really bold one. So we think a lot about how can we be bold to really harness the best benefits that can come from this technology, but also responsible. We've got to understand the risks and think about how we can build it in a way that is going to change people's lives for the best and challenge the misuse of technology. And that responsibility feels really real right now.
And we want to talk about the big social economic implications of AI more generally, but just in terms of a business transition, I mean, you've been at Google for 18 years. There have been massive changes. I mean, people like me think of Google as a young business, and compared to some, you are. But actually, thinking about it now, you're quite a mature operation. I mean, more than 25 years old. One of the things that AI is challenging is your traditional search engine. I mean, I'm somebody, as is Steph, who uses, generative AI a lot in our daily lives, and a lot of what I'm now doing on generative AI, I would traditionally have done on your search engine, but I'm now, if I'm completely honest, I'm not using Gemini on the whole. I'm using, GPT 4o, but you've got, your own version of this. How worried are you that just in a narrow sense, that these sort of very broad use AI programs are going to ultimately make your search engine, if not completely redundant, at least, send it into reverse in terms of use and advertising revenue and all of that?
So I think there's always been huge competition for attention. And I think it's always felt to me like there's been huge competition in search. When I started, we were a dial-up desktop and people were finding things through Google search quite often. But over the years, you just think about the coming of apps. You think about, if you're going on holiday, you've got a number of different travel apps you'll search. So we've always had sort of competition. And what we try to do is continue to invest in search to make it useful. And we've actually got AI built into search. Our AI overviews, which are proving really popular.
Yeah, they are useful. I mean, it pops up at the top.
But I think, some have said, and they've got their own reasons for saying so. Search is going to be dead, and everyone's going to go to these, these chatbots. And I think our view is different. That there are going to be different tools for different uses. We got to work hard to make our tools as good as possible.
So, can I ask you just on Gemini?
Yeah.
Right? Is it cannibalizing search for you?
No, I think what we're seeing is that where people are seeing these AI overviews in search, which is a sort of a summary of results and gives you a synthesis. Generally, they are going to more sites as a result of it, and they're searching more often. It's also seems to be the case that young people are finding this particularly attractive. So it's early days, but I think we're finding that's a good way of responsibly bringing our content into search. One of the concerns we have, right, is that this generative AI, as you know, hallucinates. and people trust search. So we need to be very careful about, not undermining that trust and making sure that people feel they can get useful results from us.
And just very briefly on this, Gemini is a subscription model. Does that tell us something about the way that you're evolving? Is there any way of building your advertising model into, you call it a chatbot, the chatbot, as it were?
So I think, we're at a particular moment where to the world, this sort of generative AI revolution looks like sort of chatbots, and we haven't got that many other apps yet. And, if I step right back, you guys did a great podcast earlier in the year about AI and sort of where it's going. And I think we're at a very early stage. It's a general purpose technology. And we're starting to see applications, one of which is chatbots, and you're finding it useful for lots of things, and people are. Generative AI in search is another way of doing it in a different fashion, and I think we're starting to learn the way there. But we've also got these incredible breakthroughs in other areas. So we've got something called Notebook LM, and if you haven't tried it, you should do. You can put in a load of files, ask questions about it. It can even generate a podcast, not as good as yours, but a pretty good podcast.
Won't be
And
long.
that's pretty terrifying. I wish you hadn't told the listeners that.
Have a go, listeners. But so I think we're just starting to see useful apps emerging. So don't think of generative AI as just chatbots. We're just at the beginning.
No,
of
no,
this
sure.
chat.
No, we don't.
Has there been a bit of a do you think you guys have kind of rushed out too much with things like Gemini though? Because there was obviously the controversy, wasn't there, around the images that were being generated by Gemini.
Yeah.
So is that because you kind of suddenly thought, ChatGPT, we better get out there? What are we doing? And
It's a good question, Steph. I first sort of step back. I think, famously, we'd initiated a bunch of the research that led to the Transformers models and made this sort of new generation of generative AI possible. But I think the world was surprised, and we were surprised by how users were keen to try out, ChatGPT when it first launched. Given the scale we're at, we wanted to be a bit more thoughtful and responsible in the way that we brought our products forward. But I think it was pretty clear to users that we are experimenting. And, when you go to a chatbot, not everything's going to be right. And where we've had issues, and you mentioned one of them, we've moved pretty quickly to fix it. But I think helping people to understand experimental technology, have a play, let's learn together and use it. That's, we used to always launch products sort of under beta, sort of saying it's not quite there, some things are going to break. And I think we're in that, it's such a rapid period of expansion that users' experience of products is shaping how they emerge. And I'd say, the pace of change now is as fast as I've ever seen it in my time working in technology.
I remember when I interviewed Sheryl Sandberg, and I think it was around the same time that I met you when you were launching your Google headquarters here in London. It was like 2012, and she said then that soon we won't be talking about online. That will be an old word because everything will be online, and it'll just be
for many people now. That is a bit of a reality because you've got the whole internet in your pocket. And I do think, you've got to watch how the language changes. If you go back to when I was growing up, we had colour television, not television, but colour television, because we just moved from black and whites. We had sort of mobile phones. Now we just have phones. So I think, you'll see that happen. I think we'll also find that with AI. Things will go from being AI to just being like a tool that works. And my favourite product at Google is Google Translate. And that is now very strongly powered by AI, but
it's
it
phenomenal.
Just works better
Google Translate
and better.
is just phenomenal.
Yeah, and just my favorite product really, because it's sort of, apart from it being a delight to use, it demonstrates the best of technology. Building bridges between people, helping you understand each other. I was just in Africa recently, and we launched 15 new languages on Google Translate, where you could actually speak to your phone in your local dialect. 300 million new people are able, therefore, to speak to Google in their own language. And those new languages were all learned by AI, not by simultaneously translating historic text, but by learning the language the way a child would learn a language. And that's really, a big change. And you think about all those people who don't have access to the internet in their local language today. And there's like 1,000 more languages we're working on. So it's a huge moment of change for all those people who don't have the benefits that we're all used to.
There are so many big issues that we'd like to talk about. One of them was actually something you and I were just chatting about just before the proper podcast began, excuse me, which is this macroeconomic impact of this industrial revolution that we're living through as a result of AI. You called it a general purpose technology. I was just at a lecture actually that Reid Hoffman gave over the weekend, and he said something that I think we both passionately believe, Steph and I, that this industrial revolution could be as powerful as the steam age. One of the characteristics of the steam age was, despite the fact that over a period of decades economies grew as a result of that initial industrial revolution, for several decades, individual people got poorer. Right? It is a period known in economic history as Engels' pause. And, one of the things that I don't think we're debating enough is artificial intelligence massively increases productivity, no question. We can't take for granted that those productivity gains will be distributed to working people, because actually quite a lot of the history of this digital revolution over the last 25 years is that so much of the profit has accrued to the early investors, the founders, the owners of various sorts. You, like me, will agree you can't stop an industrial revolution, but how do you make sure that an industrial revolution like this works for the public good rather than simply increasing the wealth and power of a small number of people?
I think it's a great question. One of the reasons I think the way you're looking at it is the right way to look at it. If you sort of step back, I would say this is a bit more like sort of electricity in terms of a technology revolution. So we're at the stage where we can see we got this powerful thing. We're not quite sure what it's going to be able to do. And it's also the question you've posed before is, how quickly will this revolution happen in terms of the way it changes our lives? So I think what we've seen in the last 2 years, demonstration, powerful technology, it's not quite ready for prime time, but it's starting to be productive. And what we can see is, it's been estimated, I think in the UK, could be worth as much as 400 billion to the UK economy by 2030. Could be worth 40 billion of savings in public sector, 20% efficiency for SMB. So there are some big, bold numbers out there. Then the question is, well, how's it going to change work? What are the sustainable jobs of the future? And I think it's hard to postulate. In these moments, I think it's quite easy to see the kinds of jobs where the productivity change is going to be big and the jobs could go away. So, I mean, some of the early applications of AI, things like call center technology, in marketing, you can create many, many more versions very more quickly. So you can see some of those jobs changing quite rapidly. What's hardest to see is the new industries that are going to be invented and created and how quickly they're going to come. So if I take my own example, like many people in the UK, I was the first in my family to go to university. I graduated the year Berners-Lee wrote the memo that created the web. And I've spent over 20 years working in jobs that entirely depended on that invention. And so it's something that's really close to my heart, Robert. And when I took this job looking after Google in Africa, Middle East and Europe, I read a report from the EU, and the UK was part of the EU at the time, and it said 1 million jobs are going to go unfilled because we haven't got the digital skills. So this is the new jobs. And so we said, we've got to try and do something about that. So we pledged to try to train 1 million Europeans in 2 years in digital skills that would help to fill those jobs. We were blown away by demand. We trained 1 million in the first year.
What type of people are we talking? So
Everyday
what age,
people.
what
Everyday
and did
people.
they come to you, or did you go out and find
So
them?
what we did was, in each country, we launched in partnership with others. We tried to have a program that was tailored towards the needs of the country. So in Spain, it was youth unemployment. In Germany, it was Mittelstand businesses. In the UK, we got out and about across the country outside London, tours across the country. I think in the UK, we train now 1 million people in digital skills in our digital garage program. And so we were blown away by demand. It was typically, average age was over 40. It was nearly 50-50 male-female. In fact, we now have all our programs at least 50-50 male-female, which is very different from sort of STEM education, as you understand. So I think what we've got to be ready for, to your question, Robert, is to be able to reskill people at speed through all life learning. And we've got tons of experience of that now, having done that with 90 million people globally.
I mean, one of the things that is very striking is, we are seeing those sorts of programs, in the UAE. We're seeing those sorts of programs in Singapore and Korea and Scandinavia. We're not seeing them in the UK. Why aren't we seeing them in the UK?
So I think government, they're about to launch a white paper, I think, on AI shortly. And I've been having conversations with governments in my job across Europe and Africa. about this. And you're right. I think, government need to do a bunch of different things to be ready for this revolution. You should think about it in two ways. I think there's the sort of AI producing economy. So the research, we've got brilliant research going on in our universities. I was in Dundee recently talking to the life sciences team there. They're using some of the AI technology to accelerate drug discovery. So we've got research and innovation. You've got the sort of data centers and the pipes that you need, the infrastructure investment, and then the AI using economy where public sector could really benefit, strategic industries like health could really benefit, but we need everyone to be able to use these technologies. And one of the stats that worries me is, the adoption of AI by SMBs is much higher in the US than it is in Europe and the UK. And so there's an education that's needed. I think partnership with tech companies is needed. Like I say, I'm proud we trained 1 million people in the UK. There's lots of learning there. I know that Microsoft and others are doing similar things. There's a moment for government to step in.
Do you think the curriculum is good enough, though? Because I'm at that point now. My little girl's 5 and obviously she's just started school this year. I actually watched her in a nativity yesterday. So I'm at that kind of just got over
Oh,
the
how lovely.
emotion of that. But she's doing computer lessons. And I'm saying that with quotation fingers here because it is like, and I know she's only 5, but she can use an iPad or whatever, a tablet really well. She knows what she's doing. But in school, they're doing really basic stuff that I probably did when I was at school, which is what a mouse is and how you use a mouse. And it's like, I mean, I haven't used a mouse for God knows how long anyway. And I'm not blaming the school at all, but it's a typical state school. But like, it feels like, I remember at my IT lessons at school, and I was at school when the internet came out and everything else, and when email started. And back then, the teachers, and again, I'm not blaming teachers, but they weren't of the standard of which society was already at.
Who are you blaming?
Things. I'm blaming the government. I'm blaming the curriculum. I think it's, that needs to change. Like, we've got kids coming out of school who know how to use digital devices themselves because they've got them. But in school, it's not being harnessed in the right way.
I mean, my kids are in their early 20s, and I saw them being taught the same stuff in the same ways as my parents were taught, let alone me. I do think that's a concern because in a world where you can get the world's information in a second in the palm of your hand, I think the skills that become important are critical thinking, collaboration, curiosity, communication. All the
and
things
your
that are
job is
human.
probably going to change. If people are going to live to some extraordinarily old age, you're probably going to have to change your career several times in the course of your life, and you've got to learn adaptability, the ability to learn
when I was running Google UK 15 odd years ago, one of the things we were pushing was, can we get the school curriculum to include computer science and push towards STEM subjects? And the government at the time made a bit of a move, and there was computing taught in schools. I think with this AI revolution, if you think about it, the parallel being electricity, we don't need to train everyone to work in power stations. We need everybody to be able to understand how to operate like a dishwasher and a typewriter and all the appliances that we enjoy today. So I think what schools need to be teaching is those skills I mentioned, and Robert, the kind of ability to retrain yourself.
Adaptability, resilience, all those things.
Our digital skills experience is about people actually really want to reskill in these moments. And so, the people we've learned from we've trained, lots of people coming off parental leave. Steph, you just mentioned that kind of moment. That's a really important moment for people to come back into the job market. People who've taken a redundancy package and gone, you know what? I love yoga. Maybe it's time for me to be a yoga instructor. And now, in a few moments, I can actually build a campaign and put a business online. And I think the big thing that's changed in my time at Google is anyone with a smartphone and an idea can now market their services to 70% of the planet. And that's one of the big opportunities for the UK. We're a nation of digital shopkeepers, and we're quite good at this stuff. And in this moment, you've got that huge scale.
But in terms of competitive disadvantage, I just want to ask you about your own experience. We don't have enough supercomputing capacity in the UK. We don't have enough data processing capacity in the UK. Elon Musk in the past 18 months has created 3, which he owns, supercomputers that are more powerful than any supercomputer in the UK. How, just looking at some of the structural problems, where, how complicated, you've got Google, enormous financial resources. One of the things I'm constantly told by people in your sector is, if they want to build a data center or they want to build a really powerful supercomputer. A, the planning restrictions are appalling, and B, they can't get connected to the electricity grid, so they just can't get the power.
And this is one of the things I said, you've got to invest in the AI innovation economy, which is the infrastructure and the research. We're building a data center right now in the UK at Waltham Cross. It's a £1 billion investment, I think, and it's taken time to get through planning for sure.
And what about the energy needs of that?
Yeah, so we're also like one of the world's biggest investors in renewables. So we're constantly bringing on, wind power and solar power and so on, investing heavily in Europe in that.
And,
What I do,
but what about but then connecting it? I mean, because I'm told the real problem is you simply can't connect the
That's right. So I
renewables
think grid capacity-
to the data center you want to power.
So grid capacity is an issue, and I think there's lots been written about this moment where everyone's investing big time in chips, the high end chips that allow generative AI to work, and hence Nvidia's incredible success. Everybody needs to invest in data centers and in the energy infrastructure for sure. It's also a question, I think, for governments about sovereignty and strategy. So if you've got a competitive market for compute capacity with players like Amazon, Microsoft, and Google investing heavily, most of the economy can use the services that we offer, as long as the market's competitive, to access those tools and skills. And of course, you need domestic capacity too to do the things that you can do. One of the opportunities of Brexit actually is for the government in the UK to consider that data centers are part of the energy intensive use and give some advantages to people investing in data centers.
What would they look like? Those advantages?
So I think, there are rules in Europe around energy intensive industries which allow some state sort of subsidy, but data centers don't come into that. But if you're not in Europe, you can advantage that. So there are some things that government can do to have a differential advantage here.
And are they working on that as far as you can see?
I have to wait and see when the AI white paper is published, which I think is soon. But I think the bigger picture here is, for governments to recognize the industrial revolution, as you call it, the sort of accelerated revolution that we're in, to think about how can that transform their economies and where are the strategic industries, but also where are the skills trainings that we just talked about that are needed so that we can be ready for the jobs of the future. And there's going to be a transformation of how we do our work in most jobs. Most jobs aren't going to go away, but we'll get more productive in how we do them. That's the stuff where everyday training's needed in the moment for people.
Yeah.
Can I just say one more on this? But are we as a nation being ambitious enough? I'm struck that you'll be aware of the sort of Microsoft Stargate project, which is apparently $100 billion, including building their own nuclear power station. It's great that some would say, some people with environmental concerns are going to be concerned about, the data center in, you say it was Waltham Cross, but it's £1 billion versus $100 billion. There's a big gap there.
Yeah, so I think, the first thing on the energy side, this is one of the things closest to my heart, is, I've long been involved in sustainability, and we've been carbon neutral since I began at Google, and we're always focused on making our data centers run as close as possible on renewables all the time. We're nearly 90% renewables in some of our most advanced data centers. So it's not right to say that this is going to be a big sort of environmental issue, but if the world doesn't push the renewables aspect of data centers as this big investment happens, then there's a challenge. The opportunity with all this investment is to push renewable energy investment at the same time and accelerate that transformation. But to your core question, though,
are we being ambitious enough in this country? That's what I'm asking.
And I think that's what I would encourage this country's government and others to do. Be ambitious about the fields we can lead in. As you think about Europe, you've got aging population. We've got incredible sort of state health sectors. Health's one of the biggest opportunities right now with AI. So we talked a bit about chatbots. The most exciting AI breakthroughs I see are things like AlphaFold 3, which I was just saying, our colleagues won the Nobel Prize for their work on AlphaFold 3. This is a database of protein structures. Prior to their work, there were about 175,000 protein structures had been identified through sort of painstaking inspection work by PhD students. It would take 5 years for a PhD student to find the 3D structure of one protein. And AlphaFold 3 was able to model the 3D structure of 200 million proteins in a matter of 24 months. So suddenly you've got an explosion of research. And what happens, I mentioned I was in Dundee and they've got a world-leading life sciences department there. I went around and talked to people working on Parkinson's and malaria, an array of diseases. And they were saying, we did something in a day last week that would have taken 5 years previously. And already there's over 2.3 million researchers working with this database. It's available free to researchers. And a bit like generative AI can give you, a first draft of a script in seconds. This is taking you steps down the road towards drug discovery. People are working on things like enzymes that eat plastics. Transformational. And you say, well, how does the UK play into that? Well, firstly, we've got incredible research departments like that. Secondly, we've got the NHS. And although data and the NHS is all locked in different places, it has got this incredible patient record understanding of a whole array of health issues.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about that, haven't we? We don't capitalise on it.
It's a huge opportunity. And I talked to
So how do we make sure
you don't get all the money?
That Google doesn't get all the money and that the British people get the rewards?
It's totally fair. So firstly, just to be clear on AlphaFold, we've given it for free to these researchers to research on. And there's lots of opportunity for then, commercialization over time. I think the opportunity in health is to ensure that people are using these tools and technologies. I was just going to say, I met with 3 clinicians a few months ago in Cambridge, and they were working. One was a cardiologist, one was an oncologist, and one was a geneticist. And they're all using AI in their work. And what they were telling me were there were sort of 3 challenges. The first is the NHS putting the data together in a way that can be useful for research. The second is that clinicians themselves are nervous, just like people are nervous in their jobs. Is this going to take away my job? Does it undermine my expertise? Once they started using the technology, they realized it was assistive. It's not taking away the job. It's actually giving them an assistant that's really helpful. And then the third challenge is the public feeling comfortable that these technologies are really going to help them.
So can I just make 2 points on the assistance point? Actually, because it goes to the heart of what AI is not going to just do for medicine, but for the whole economy. So there was some research that you will probably have seen that was done with some doctors at the end of last year, actually using the last iteration, not GPT 4.0, but the last iteration of ChatGPT. And they basically gave some symptoms to a bunch of doctors. Some of those doctors didn't have access to ChatGPT. A bunch had access to ChatGPT. And then the third group was just ChatGPT without any doctors. And one of the things that was a slightly shocking result was that the diagnostic accuracy was best for ChatGPT with no human impact. That even it was better than even the doctors being aided by the ChatGPT as an advisory tool.
How does that work though? Because if the doctors were aided by ChatGPT, were they disagreeing?
They were disagreeing.
Right.
So what happened was, it's a bit like your Uber driver who says, I don't trust Google Maps or Waze. I know the best route, and it turns out the individual doesn't.
Yes.
We all have this instinct that we know better than the machine. And the other thing that was really interesting to me was, again, I don't know if you agree with him, but as I said, I had this lecture from Reid Hoffman, and he said right now he and lots of other people are in the position to build an app that they say is more powerful, more reliable than going to see your GP if you want diagnosis. The reason they haven't done it is because there's no country in the world which will currently authorize that. Regulation gets in the way. Every country says we've got to have the human involved. And so, we are at a phase, however, where in a sense, we've got to make decisions as societies how much responsibility, when it comes to something as important as our health, we simply transfer to the machine, how much we keep humans in the loop. And then there's just a broader issue, which is, what will the world of work look like? If machines can do it better, and then you take humans out of it, yes, you can reskill humans to do new jobs, but some people will have a life of leisure, probably.
So, Robert, you cover quite a lot there.
There is a lot there. I agree.
Let's try and unpick a bit of it. So I think the first thing about, doctors with ChatGPT, and I haven't seen that research, but I think our experiences, as you say, people have to get comfortable that this is an assistive technology and start to get confidence. And that's what I was hearing from those different clinicians, that, it takes some time for them to get comfortable. Once they do, it's really productive. A specific example I can give you, we've worked on breast cancer screening. So you train an AI looking at mammograms, and pretty quickly it's seen more mammograms than any human is ever going to see. And we're now able to identify the signs of breast cancer as accurately as a clinician can. And we're in the process with 3 NHS trusts of starting to look at how you roll that out. If you roll it out well, what happens is women who go for screening get the answer faster. They get their negative result really quickly, and the clinicians can focus on the edge cases and the patients that need help. So you get better productivity for the clinicians, better outcome for the patient. Who's not going to want that sort of service? And I think in other sort of visual health areas like retinal ophthalmology, eye scans, we're starting to see that sort of technology happen and take off. So I think thing one, it is entirely feasible. I think we'll get used to these things quite quickly as people begin to see them as assistants, and it's going to improve the quality of healthcare and the accessibility to healthcare. And on that note, by the way, I mentioned I was in Africa. I was in Kenya, and we're supporting a project there called Jacaranda Health. And the maternal death rate in Kenya is twice the global average. The death rate in sort of going through the childbirth process, which is pretty shocking. What these people are doing is 2 things. One, they're giving women on a feature phone access to a chat functionality that they can ask questions about the stages of pregnancy. But the other thing, which is mind-blowing, is an ultrasound machine costs $70,000, and it's 200 hours of training to have somebody trained up to work. They've got a $2,000 handheld unit, which we've helped them to build with AI. Anybody can go and take the right swipes of a stomach,
Wow.
and it can help them to identify the stage of gestation of the fetus and any issues that are going on. So suddenly,
That's amazing.
That
you push
is-
it out to
yeah.
the
So
edge of the
exciting.
network.
And I was going to ask you actually about that, because one of the things that occurred to me, if these apps are genuinely as good as, seeing your GP in countries where there are just too few qualified doctors, why wouldn't you just roll out,
Yeah.
because the health benefits, if you're just rolling out an app to people who've got smartphones, the health benefits could be tremendous.
Exactly. So I tell you that story because I want to illustrate that I think where the need is greater, we're going to see a higher pace of innovation. And, in Kenya, another meeting I had was with the Justice Minister. And she was telling me, in COVID, they did all of their, hearings online. And what they realized was it can work really well if you get it right. And they want to get justice out to the edge of the network. And they can therefore do a lot more work online. They're going to digitize faster than European justice systems. I'm pretty certain. So I think there's this journey we have to go on. The final point I was just going to make there. You've got to get the clinicians and the professionals comfortable with the assistive nature. You've also got to get the public comfortable. So to the question you were raising about Reid Hoffman, it's now been possible with Waymo and other self-driving car technologies to drive cars more safely by computer than by human. Right? It's been possible for a long time. So the question
And
is,
why is that happening in California and not here?
So, the question is, if it does have an accident, like how high is the threshold in terms of how much better a computer has to be than a human? And it turns out it's between sort of 2 and 5 times. So the car at high speed is 5 times less likely to have an accident than a human, and at lower speed it's something like 2 times. So you're starting to understand that. So it's really interesting. The computers have to be significantly better than humans, not for writing an essay, right? It could be down at the same standard, but for sort of health and safety issues, much higher bar.
I just want to come back to that on the public point of view and kind of the micro level on this at the moment. So an example with the car is my partner was buying a new car recently, and she was saying how when she was buying the car, they were saying it used to have a function on it. They trialed this function on it where it would park the car for you.
Yeah.
And I was like, genius, what a great thing,
course.
and park it. But it took so long, it annoyed everyone else in the car park when it was doing it. Anyway, that was just an example we were talking about recently. But the thing the other night, this is a bit of an anecdote, but I think it reflects kind of how a lot of people feel about AI in terms of how you get over the fears around it. So I was out with some of my mates. One of them works in a university. She's a lecturer. Her big issue is everyone using generative AI to write essays.
Yeah.
And the problem they've got is they have a system in which to check this, but then they're feeding the generative AI with more information. I've got another friend who was there as well, who helps unemployed people get into work. So she is particularly focused on people who've been made redundant in different industries, or they're just struggling generally to get into work. It's her job. She works with the council to help people get back into work. It's a she works for the council. And she was saying their big problem is everyone creating CVs that are not them using generative AI. So again, she keeps having to sit with people going, Kev, I know you didn't write this, Kev. Come on. This is not
Yeah.
what you. And then another friend who's an author who's really worried about what's going to happen in terms. And I know these are all little things, but in terms of that perception of what AI's going to do, the medical stuff, amazing. We all want that. But how do you get over that worry about, hang on a minute, people are going to cheat? People are, you know.
Steph, these are absolutely brilliant examples. And one of the challenges, I think, is that the speed of this revolution is really fast. And so it's really hard to adapt. So I think we know that, certainly for ChatGPT, I think it's the case for Gemini, the biggest single use case is homework. The second, I think, is coding assistance, which is a different thing and is quite productive. We talked a bit earlier about education, right? One of the challenges is we assess our students by their ability to write essays. And that's helpful because critical thinking and so on. But actually, they've got tools to do all kinds of different things today. So we're probably assessing the wrong capabilities.
Yeah, I agree.
And that is a challenge. So the education system is going to catch up. I know one of the early ways that people have been trying to address this is putting, in white text on a white background alongside the essay title, use the word squirrel 3 times. And then when the student sticks it into generative AI, sure enough, the word squirrel comes in, they do a search and they go, well, you've done it this way.
Yeah.
There are more sophisticated ways of doing that sort of thing. And that gets to your question about IP, intellectual property and authors.
Yeah.
So we have a thing called Synth ID. We can watermark generative AI images and video and text so that it can be identified as being produced by generative AI. That's a technology I think will open source so that more people can use it. So I think we'll get better at understanding.
Sorry to interrupt, but does that mean if you cut and paste it in that kind of, that way, would it then have all over it? Like this?
Yeah, so
this
I mean, it's a clever way of doing it. But
Peter
so
James or
imagine if you make a video or an image, it's the way in which the probabilities are used in choosing this word but not that word that gives a sort of fingerprint to even a piece of text, so that using clever algorithms you can sort of identify and say this was generated. So that's one of the techniques that you can use to sort of manage that. And we won YouTube. When we bought YouTube in 2006, it was 2 massive lawsuits about copyright and a storage problem. Now it's become incredibly successful because we've built a copyright protection system, which is incredibly popular with people saying, this is my copyright. So we've got to build those sort of technologies for new generative AI. I can see a route to doing that. But you're right, society also has to adjust in these ways as well. And it's going to be difficult to adjust at the speed that's needed.
It is really hard because on the one hand, you've got artists who, and I mean artists in the broadest sense, creative people in the broadest sense, who want to use generative AI to enhance what they do. But then there is this issue about plagiarism and where you draw the line in terms of, how you put in place protections so that, genuinely creative people aren't getting their ideas and their creativity stolen is really hard.
Yeah, and what we've tried to do with the technology is work with small groups of artists in the context of YouTube and music creativity, for example, to sort of let them play with the tools and see what they find. And they find it, like Wycliffe was one of the fantastic talents who's used our tools. Incredible to be able to generate new types of music and different things very, very quickly. But you also want to control their own intellectual property. So I think we'll see this unfold as the tools come. We need to be responsible about how we do this because we obviously want people to thrive. But if you go back, the other side of the equation we haven't really talked about in this discussion is the sort of huge the economists would call it consumer surplus that's generated by all of these tools. I'll go back just to the basics of something like search. It's of huge value in sort of saving you time and money and getting you accurate information and so on and so forth. And it's something that's provided free, funded by advertising to everyone. We've got used to all these services being supported in a way that this technology is almost zero cost for us to use, including generative AI, for example. So I think, we've got to think about what are all those benefits that come as well, and how do we get the balance right? And I spend a lot of time talking to policymakers here, and I think, for me, it's about governments and companies and sort of civil society coming together and saying, well, how do we make these trade-offs in the right way?
But this is a moment where we've really, we've got to do this at pace, and it is an urgent thing, because one of the things I think we did learn about the consumer benefits of, all the, extraordinary digital breakthroughs we've had since the mid-90s, is there have also been really significant social harms created, whether it's the mental health issues around social media, for example. And so we're now going through this other great phase of economic and social revolution. And we've just got to be totally vigilant the whole time to make sure that some of these social harms, you were talking earlier about how in your energy use you have tried to be essentially a clean green user of energy. We still, as a society, don't price into our energy the costs of fossil fuel use properly. And, many people would argue that within the digital sphere, we don't price properly, capture properly, some of the harms.
Yeah, so I listened to you had a great interview, I think, with Danny Blanchflower about his research on the impact of social media. And I think, it's unquestionably the case we need to better understand as society what the right rules and norms are around social media. We're not a social media company, but I can see that issue. Some of the things that, we think it's a combination of
Well, there
tools.
was historically stuff on YouTube that was
Yeah.
toxic, and
absolutely.
and you had to work very hard
Yeah.
to remove quite a lot.
Well,
of that.
let's take that an example. It's
Yeah.
a good example, I think, of how you can get governments, companies, and communities to come together to
Yeah.
find a path through. So, if I go back about 10 years on YouTube, we had a problem because there was videos that were being used to radicalize people. And it was quite hard to identify because, people would say to me, Matt, how come there's no pornography on YouTube, but, you can't solve this problem? And the answer is, if we went out in the street outside and surveyed 100 people, they'd probably be 100% agreed on what is and what isn't pornographic. But if you showed them videos of a man talking to a camera about politics, there'd be a real diversity of opinion. So what we did in that context, we said, we've got a problem. And we went and we worked with 150 different expert organizations, from Europol to terrorist expertise and so on. And we came up with a set of policies. We then had people classify our videos against those policies until we could get them to classify them in the same way. And we then used those videos to train machines and AI to run those policies. And we now publish a report we've done for years on how well we're doing against those policies. And, today, a video that violates our violent extremist policy, more than 90% of them are removed before a single human sees them. And then we can get to the edge cases. Now, it's a slightly long story, but I tell you that because there are now laws in place that prescribe the responsibilities of platforms in Europe, the Digital Services Act. There are rules that we have. You can read our policies on YouTube, and there is transparency reporting that sort of shares how we're doing on that. And we continue to update those policies. I think that's a good mix. And that's what I'd say is a good roadmap for government to think about, having responsibilities made clear in law, codes of practice, and policies that can be audited through dialogue between regulators and technology companies. And obviously, you're always going to need to see those new edge cases that are coming along and adapt policies as you go.
What do you think of Australia banning social media for kids? Do you think?
Yeah, that's a recent ban. And I think that's a difficult one. I'm not a social media expert personally, but I do think that there's an onus around parents, families, and government to come together on what the right norms are. That seems like an extreme. I've not seen a compelling set of evidence about what needs to be done.
There's also a
I think
blur
the
on
UK
what
is being a bit more cautious, and I think rightly so. How much do you want the state to prescribe what you can do?
there's a blur on what social media is, though, isn't there? Because you're kind of saying we're not social media, but YouTube is social media. Like, everything's social media now, isn't it? How we all communicate.
Yeah, but I think it's there's a question as to what standards you operate to. And I think if you're big, you operate to a higher standard. That's one of the things that Europe's done very clearly. Its Digital Services Act and Digital Markets Act apply only to the biggest players. And that's right. You have a higher responsibility. You will get edge case issues. And when we do, we have a real transparent dialogue about those things. But, what's different about YouTube is it's got huge sort of educational and social value, as well as, entertainment and other things. And I think it's sort of differentiated itself through the process that I've just articulated in terms of the level of responsibility that it shows. But I think in general, the bigger picture question here is, when technologies come along, how quickly do we as society normalize our use of them? So when you talk to Danny Blanchflower, he's saying, well, people are on social media for 5 hours a day. Well, Americans were watching television for 5 hours a day. When your kid's on their phone, what are they doing? Well, they could be chatting, they could be doing homework, they could be educating themselves, they could be talking to friends, they're doing a whole array of different things. So we need to unpick it and be thoughtful about where we decide to set laws versus what our social norms are.
So we're running out of time, annoyingly, but you've very kindly joined us for an absolutely fascinating conversation at the moment that you've decided to leave Google after 18 years. So, a sort of couple of questions. How, thinking back to the individual who was 18 years younger when you joined Google, what would that younger person think about the kind of world we've just been discussing, the Google and the digital and the AI world that we're currently inhabiting? And you've been running for the last 10 years the whole of sort of Europe and the Middle East for Google. What's the hardest thing that you've had to deal with in that time?
So if I take the first question, I think, when I started at Google, 2007, less than 20% of the planet online, and we had this mission, organize the world's information and make it accessible and useful for everyone. I don't think I would have predicted, the smartphone revolution and the fact that 70% of people now have got the entire internet in their pocket with things like Google Translate. We're very close to having delivered on that promise. And at the time, it seemed like, a lofty goal that was worth aiming for, but we were never going to get to. So I think I would have been amazed by the pace of change. And, we're at another moment where I think the pace of change has huge promise, lots of risks, but huge promise. I think in terms of the difficult things through that period, there's a few sort of growing pains you have as a company. When I started, it was like, we've got to hire people, we've got to figure out how to work this,
And
everything
how many
was
people
just going
how
up.
many people were employed, for example, just in the UK
In
when
the
you
UK
joined and now?
In the UK, I think we were under 200 people when I started in 2007. It's getting on towards 7,000 now.
And you were doing stuff like digitizing books and things like
Yes.
that, weren't you?
Yeah. I mean, I remember the first thing I did sort of getting out and trying to encourage the UK was something called Get British Business Online, which was basically telling people, get a website. Because we saw that
Wow.
people who had websites and were selling online were growing twice as fast and creating more jobs. So there's been this sort of mission to sort of digitizing books. That's the world's information, translate, and all these things.
Street View, did that start around
Street
then?
View. We started that a couple of years later, which was, the ability to see. I used to get letters from people saying, can you come back? Because I left my bins out when you drove past. So that was one of the difficult challenges. So I think I would never imagined how quickly this has taken off. I think the other thing, that's underpinned our conversation is how quickly we get used to as consumers these innovations. We take for granted all these things. And if you just pause for a minute, it's mind-blowing what you can do with a phone in your hand now. Absolutely mind-blowing. Some of the difficult things, I think, growing pains of going from like hiring lots of people to sort of saying, hang on a minute, suddenly I remember my second year at Google, we became, I think, the biggest media company in the UK in terms of advertising revenues. And nobody knew us. And
the hate that was being poured on you from the owners of newspapers and all of that.
That's been a constant theme. I think there's a shift which has democratized access to information, but sort of undermined, the position of some incumbent sort of media. That's been a challenge all the way through, even though we work really closely with all the publishers and so on. So I think some of the challenges have been like sort of just growing up as an organization, from the brightly colored fun people who are telling you to get a website to, being responsible for things like radicalization on YouTube and the size of our success, meaning the responsibilities we had. And I suppose one of the things that's been interesting in my job is I've been the person saying to our colleagues in California, no, we have to do this. It's the right thing to do. This is why we need to do it. And the lovely diversity of cultures that I represent across Africa and Europe and the UK oftentimes have been asking the tough questions of technology sooner. Right? Actually, here we've been asking about digital sovereignty, and we've been asking about copyright, and we've been asking about child safety before the Americans have got to it. And I think that's been fascinating. And now I think those questions are being asked around the world. So trying to figure out the right way to be responsible and explain this technology has been part of the job.
And if you think about just the sheer size, not only of Google, but of Microsoft, of all the businesses controlled by Musk, these days it's a sort of commonplace that organizations like yours are as powerful as a country, the government of a country. Do you think that you have a sense as an organization of the responsibilities that come with that?
I mean, I don't think it's right to say that in terms of, it's like a country. I think, we're very much, we have to operate under the laws of every country in which we operate in, and policymakers make the rules. One of my jobs has been to try to be able to explain to governments how the technologies work as they think about those rules. But it's absolutely the case, and this is where I started the conversation, actually. We need to be bold in innovation and responsible in how we harness it. And, I think we're in this moment, as we see with generative AI, people are concerned about mistakes, they're concerned about misuse, they're concerned about misinformation. But I think the bigger risk is missing out on this moment to harness technology for good by being involved in it at the forefront, looking at the issues and the opportunities as they arrive, and then saying, well, how do we put the right structures and skills in place, as we've said through this conversation, to really make sure we land it
So
for
we've
good.
got to accept, I guess, mistakes in order to make progress. Is that what
I think
you're kind of saying?
I think that's right. There are always going to be mistakes with new technology, and we need to be cognizant of those issues and manage them. And if you can say, well, this is experimental, it may not work, but let's learn from it. It's a good way to proceed. But if we're not at the forefront, then other people will be misusing the technology. So we need to be able to fight back. And lots of the antidotes to sort of misinformation are using AI to fight against the misuse and misinformation that can come from it. So you've got to be in it to win it. And I think that's an important thing for governments to think about as they look at this revolution.
I'm conscious we need to wrap up, but one thing I want to know is who decides on the little decoration around the word Google when you go on each day?
We're on to the big questions.
Yeah, that's me. No, we have some really nice people who kind of look at that, and one of the things that always delights people is exactly that, the little doodles we have. Long may those continue.
And I always imagine somewhere that, what should we do today? Let's put flowers around it or whatever.
You could apply for the job if you like.
Yeah,
but
thanks.
don't send a CV that's been produced by generative AI.
Because you'll know.
Yeah, we'll know.
Yeah. Oh, Matt, thank you so much for your time.
Such a
Thank
fascinating
you.
conversation.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
Thanks for
good to
having
have
me.
you here.
Thank you.
And that's it from us, and the rest is money. Bye-bye.
See you soon.